Angie Housman was a 9-year-old girl living in St. Anne, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. She lived with her mother and stepfather and attended Booter Elementary School. Angie was known for being an outgoing, trusting, and friendly child. She loved riding her bike and playing with her friends, which made her disappearance even more shocking to her family and community. Angie lived with her mother Diane and her stepfather in a modest home in St. Anne, Missouri. She had a regular school day scheduled, and like most days, she prepared to go to Booter Elementary School, where she was a 4th grade student. Angie had reportedly been talking to her classmates about how excited she was about the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, just a week away, eager for the break and the chance to spend time with family. She was known for being a very trusting and outgoing child. Her mother was reported stating that Angie was the type of girl who would talk to strangers. This fact deeply worried her mother. However, on this particular day, she went about her routine as usual and was seen off to school without any incident in the morning. After school ended, Angie boarded the school bus that would take her home. The bus dropped her off at her regular stop around 4 p.m., just 1 block from her home. Several witnesses reported seeing Angie get off the bus and begin walking home. She was carrying her backpack and was wearing her winter coat. She would have had to walk just a short distance to reach her home. This was the last confirmed sighting of Angie before she was gone. At some point between getting off the bus and reaching her house, she had vanished. Hundreds of community members joined law enforcement in an extensive search for Angie. The search covered nearby areas and included helicopters, posters, and numerous segments through the media. Despite these efforts, no significant leads emerged in the days following her disappearance. Witnesses saw her walking home, but no one could provide any information about what happened afterward. Unfortunately, bad news would arrive as 9 days after her disappearance, Angie's body was found in a remote section of the Bush Wildlife Area in St. Charles County, Missouri, about 20 miles from her home. Details about her condition were heartbreaking. Law enforcement determined she had been held for several days after her abduction and left in the wilderness. A deer hunter stumbled upon her remains in a secluded, wooded area. It was evident that she had been abandoned there, likely days before her body was found. The area was isolated, and no one had come across the scene until the hunter's unfortunate discovery. Investigators collected evidence from the scene, including a partial fingerprint on materials found with her, which would become crucial in solving the case. Despite the initial amount of evidence collected, forensic technology in 1993 was not advanced enough to provide immediate results, leaving the case to go cold for several years. Angie's details are quite disturbing. Poor Angie was found tied to a tree. Her hands were bound, and duct tape was used to cover her mouth. Her body was partially closed. Her coat had been draped over her. Forensic analysis revealed that she had been held captive for around 5 to 7 days before she was left in the woods. She'd been subjected to severe mist treatment and was indeed alive during much of her captivity. The primary cause of death was exposure and hypothermia. She was alive when she was left in the wooded area and had slowly succumbed to the cold. Investigators interviewed multiple individuals with prior offenses, but none of the leads produced a breakthrough. No arrests were made, and the case stalled. The case remained in the public eye with media reports and continued community efforts to keep her memory alive. Investigators revisited the case several times over the years, always searching for any possible missed leads. But no progress was made, despite ongoing investigations and community press. The case would remain cold. It remained unsolved for over 25 years, frustrating both investigators and Angie's family, who continued to see justice. At the time of her discovery, investigators immediately focused on collecting all possible forensic evidence. Several key pieces of evidence were found on her body. The duct tape on her eyes and mouth. This duct tape became a crucial piece of evidence. It had been used to gag Angie, covering her mouth and eyes. Investigators found a partial fingerprint on the sticky side of the duct tape. This was a vital clue, but in 1993, fingerprint and DNA databases were not as developed as they are today. At the time, they could not match the fingerprint to a suspect due to the limitations of the fingerprint database and the absence of a DNA match in existing records. There were clear ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, indicating that she had been tied up while she was held captive. These marks showed how she had been restrained for a period of days before being left in the wilderness. The medical examiner discovered evidence of physical and sexual abuse during the autopsy. However, DNA samples taken from her body were insufficient to identify a suspect at the time, due to the limitations in forensic testing during the early 1990s. While the case remained unsolved for many years, the physical evidence collected, especially the duct tape, was preserved. The case was revisited multiple times over the years, but in 2019, significant breakthroughs were made thanks to advancements in forensic technology. With modern techniques, investigators reanalyzed the duct tape found on Angie's face. This time, they were able to extract a clearer partial fingerprint from it. This fingerprint was run through national databases that had been significantly expanded and improved since the 1990s. A match was found. The partial fingerprint on the duct tape matched Earl Cox, a convicted child molester with a long history of sexual offenses. Cox had been in the system for other crimes, but his connection to Angie Housman's case had not been identified until this new forensic testing. In addition to the fingerprint, modern DNA testing was able to analyze and compare biological material collected during the original investigation, further linking Cox to the crime. This combination of evidence made the case against Cox airtight. Federal court documents say Cox was born and raised in St. Louis. He joined the Air Force in 1975 after he graduated from high school. 5 years into his career as a computer operator, the military court marshaled Cox for sexual assault, his victims. They were 4 young girls between the ages of 7 and 11 that he was babysitting at a main Air Force base in Frankfurt, Germany. He was dishonorably discharged and served 5 years of an 8-year sentence set for Leavenworth in Kansas. While on parole, Cox returned to the St. Louis area, and in just a few years he was in trouble again. He was arrested 2 more times for inappropriate contact with young children in Bridgerton in 1988, and in Overland in 1989. He was charged, and he wasn't convicted. They revoked his parole, and he spent another year in Fort Leavenworth in 1992. This is from 1988 for a petty larceny in Bridgerton, the same year he transferred his parole status to Missouri, and 5 years before murder of Angie Housman. When Cox got out, he moved back to the St. Louis area to live with his mother, and a Lewis County speeding ticket record lists his address around that time as being on the 3400 block of Wismar, just 3 blocks from the home on Wright Avenue, where 9-year-old Angie Housman lived with her mother, Diane Bone, and her stepfather, Ron Bone. Federal court documents go on the state that Cox involved himself in an online child pornography ring in 1997, eventually running administrating boards for the online group in 2002, while living in Pueblo, Colorado. Cox contacted a woman he believed to be a 14-year-old girl through an internet chat room, exchanged explicit emails, and Cox sent her money for a bus ticket with the offer for her to travel from Virginia to be his sex slave. That woman was an FBI agent, and authorities arrested him at their scheduled meeting. Further investigation of Cox after the arrest uncovered 45,000 child images on his computer. He was charged and pled guilty to receiving child pornography and attempted enticement of a minor across state lines to engage in sexual activity. His arrest also led to an arrest of another member of the child pornography ring in the United Kingdom. The court sentenced him to 10 years in prison, with a release date in September 2011. But a law passed in 2006 meant he might never be released. The federal government moved to certified Cox as a sexually dangerous person under the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act. 3 licensed clinical psychologists examined Cox and an evaluation that laid out his history and his state of mind. The psychologists who examined Cox described a history of abuse in his childhood. They wrote that he will have serious difficulty refraining from engaging in sexually violent conduct if released. His victims were uniformly prepubescent girls, and the psychologist wrote that he did not take responsibility for his actions. Cox told one psychologist that he was caught in the FBI sting on purpose to take down the child pornography ring from the inside. Earl Cox has fought his civil commitment since then, saying in 2013 that his current health and good behavior while in prison should prove that he was unlikely to reoffend. Police say they have questioned him a lot over the 26 years since Angie's death, keeping a close eye on the possibility that Cox was the culprit. While Earl sat behind bars, thanks to breakthroughs in medical and forensic sciences, Earl Cox's DNA was matched to the evidence in Angie Housman's case in early 2019. Specifically, the breakthrough came in March 2019. After this match was confirmed, charges were officially brought against him on August 2nd, 2019. Had Earl Cox's car not broken down on November 8, 1993, 9-year-old Angie Housman might still be alive. It's one of the details the 63-year-old shared with his public defender as part of a confession made to avoid the death penalty in exchange for his confession in the 1993 killing. St. Charles County prosecutor Tim Lomar agreed to take the death penalty off the table. Cox pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and child molestation, and after a few short weeks later, he would confess to his attorney. Reports by journalist Robert Patrick Lamar explains that Cox told his attorney he had some trouble with his car on the afternoon. Earl then proceeded to stop to see what was wrong. A few minutes later, he saw a school bus stop where Angie was getting off. At first, Cox told his attorney that Angie approached him first, a typical trait of somebody who is a predator of children in their own minds. They have to figure out a way to live with themselves, and so they just have to minimize things and sort of distance themselves from the bad things that they've done to these kids, Lamar explained. Cox said he asked Angie if she was hungry. Since she was, she got his car, and they stopped by Burger King and just drove around, and the rest, unfortunately, is history. Investigators suggest they were in the car for an extended period of time, potentially hours, and eventually he took her back to his residence, and that's where he brutally sexually assaulted her for an extended period of time. Cox said he kept Angie hidden in a mobile home when he lived in St. Charles County for days. At the time, he had a live-in girlfriend. Investigators questioned the woman who told them Cox forbid her from going into a back bedroom of their home. The woman from another country barely spoke English at the time and told investigators she lived in fear of Cox and worked odd hours. Investigators believe Cox manipulated that situation so it would not to be exposed. Exactly how long he kept Angie and his mobile home, or when he left her dead about 5 to 6 miles from his home. It's one of several questions that remain because Cox had a stroke, along with the passage of time has left gaps in his memory of the crime. The true story may never be known. Cox did not have any connection to the wooded area where he left Angie to die, other than it's a remote area just off of heavily trafficked route. Lamar's report states that Cox told his attorney that he left her there hoping someone would find her. But Lamar doesn't buy that theory. Lamar states he thought by the time anybody would discover her body, they would never be able to identify the remain because it was that remote. He said it was cold in the wintertime. It was snow on the ground, so my assumption is that he just assumed that she would sit out there for a long time and nobody would find her till he's long gone. Instead of Hunter found Angie's body, and the worst part of it all is medical experts believe she died just hours before she was found. Angie was laid to rest at Laurel Hill Memorial Gardens. The grave of Angie Housman is decorated by artificial flowers in Laurel Hill Memorial Gardens at St. Charles Rock Road and Pennsylvania Ave. Angie Housman's parents, particularly her mother, Diane, struggled immensely with their loss, even after Earl Cox was identified and charged for her daughter's death. Diane never lived to see the resolution of the case. She passed away in 2016, still not knowing who was responsible for her daughter's death. Diane's grief was overwhelming, and for years. She kept the curtains closed at their home to avoid looking at the bus stop where Angie was last seen. Her stepfather, Ron, revealed that Diane would break down into tears whenever she saw the street, and she struggled with suicidal thoughts after Angie's death. Although her family and friends tried to support her, Diane could never recover from the loss. The family held on to memories of Angie in different ways, including keeping her pink bicycle as a symbol of the vibrant young girl she was. Ron Bone and the family stayed in the same duplex for a few years after her death. Haunted by the memory of Angie, but also holding on to the remnants of her short life, her memory lives on with those who cherished and loved Angie. Such a tragic case serves a grim reminder of the overgrowing challenges parents face with educating their children about talking to strangers. I hope I've done some justice on shining light on your case. Your memory lives on with your family, loved ones, and me. Rest in peace, Angie Housman. You will never be forgotten.